I walked with it through the forest. We came to the monument, and there was a little bit of a ceremony, and I very ostentatiously deployed it in front of the monument so it could be seen. I noticed that the party secretary became very agitated. I do not know whether he knew English well, but he must have noticed 1940. He probably recognized Stalin and NKVD, and I couldn't tell what he would do. And at that moment, Moscow television, which had a crew there, which obviously was sent from Moscow, because it was the government that arranged my visit, came up to me and asked for a comment. And I very spontaneously said, "Here lie Polish officers, murdered in 1940 by Stalin and the NKVD. And public recognition of this fact is the point of departure for reconciliation between the Poles and the Russians, for thousands of Russians were murdered by Stalin and the NKVD also, and some of them also lie here in Katyn." The party secretary relaxed. The television didn't ask for any further comments. We flew back immediately to Moscow on a special plane, I suspect from the airport, where the tragedy recently occurred. And that evening, the American ambassador early evening, runs into my room in the residence of the ambassador and says, "Turn on the television quick. A program on Katyn is being run nationwide on Soviet television." So we turn it on. The program is already on, and the screen is showing, rather rapidly, a list of those buried or shot there, rather rapidly, from top to the bottom of the page, and then another page like this. But it stops and lingers for about 5 seconds, long enough so you can read the name. And obviously, it was designed. And it's some lieutenant called Brzezinski, with the first name. Not a relative, no one I knew or heard of, but obviously designed to communicate something to those who were viewing it. And then immediately after the showing of that list, it goes on to say, "And today, earlier today, a group of Americans, including the former National Security Advisor by name, visited Katyn, and this is what the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States said." And they broadcast verbatim, word for word, what I said. The ambassador and I concluded, of course, and a cable was sent to Washington, this signals, obviously, a decision to face the truth, to admit what comes. This was in 1989, and the official recognition of the truth came a few weeks later. So for me, this was actually, in a sense, a source of liberation. It somehow or other made me feel that in this terribly cruel century, this issue is finally now being settled. And that evening, I went to the House of Literature in Moscow. I think this is some sort of a club for the literati. And I was amazed how many Russians came up to me and wanted to shake my hand, wanted to thank me for what I said. And that was meaningful to me because for years I knew that I was known in the Soviet Union and so officially described as niebezizwiestny wrag Sowieckiego Sojuza, the not unknown enemy of the Soviet Union. And I sensed that this was the beginning of something. And of course, what has happened more recently is so much more important than the episode I described. But I wanted to convey to you the linkage between history and human psychology and why this is so important. And that is also why the positive, human, warm reaction of the present Russian authorities to the tragedy, and particularly to the events of the second tragedy, is so pregnant with potential. Putin was there a few days earlier and acknowledged in a formal speech the truth. But he did it still like a statesman, almost somewhat dispassionately and coldly. And it left a feeling of frustration or dissatisfaction still. And then 3 days later, when this event occurred, Putin himself showed a degree of humaneness and warmth and identification, followed by Medvedev's gestures, and the very warm reaction, particularly of the Russian public in Moscow, that something fundamentally had changed. And I do think it is the beginning of a change, because changes in the basic relationship between peoples begin not by formal treaties and formal reconciliation. They begin by a change in feelings, in attitude. And that, I think, is now happening. And it has momentum. And it is worth cultivating and pushing forward. We live in a time in which Europe devastated itself and committed suicide, and then was reborn gradually, first by German-French reconciliation, more recently by German-Polish reconciliation. Polish-Russian reconciliation is the next necessary step. And if that happens, and I think there's a real opportunity for it, then a great many things will change, including ultimately the basic relationship of Russia to Europe and Russia's role in the world. And incidentally also, Russia's relationships not just with Poland, but with Estonia, or with Ukraine, or with Georgia, with which the past still preponderates many times. So there is a significant geopolitical, historical message in what is transpiring, and is to be welcomed. And commentaries by individual Russians in the Russian press speak to that very explicitly. Many articles in Russian press have picked up on this theme. And most important of all, the Russian people have picked up on this theme. And as the knowledge of the past eliminates the past, the future becomes more manageable, more promising. And that ultimately may be the most important message of Katyn. Thank you.